He is the most trustworthy independent sports journalist in the country. His name is Jamie Wall, and he works a number of, shall we say, platforms, including Radio New Zealand and many others. Let's talk some Super Rugby, mate. It was one of them rounds again where there's a heck of a lot of talking points. I don't know whether there's a hell of a lot of great games, but I want to start with the Chiefs and the Blues, because this is a Blues side that if they do not finish 1 or 2 and get that home playoff, they've only got themselves to blame. Jamie, for the third time, they've lost to a side that they should have beaten. Brumbies, Crusaders and Chiefs. In every game, they have left so many points out there. It is just, Leon McDonald doesn't seem to think it is as much of a problem as I think he should think it is.
Yeah, g'day, Marty. I'm starting to wonder about the Blues and about where their heads are at the moment, because you're right. They've had enough ball and enough territory to win all their games so far, and especially on Saturday night. And don't get me wrong, it was a fantastic defensive effort by a very good Chiefs team who kind of had to adjust to a game where they didn't have it all their own way, and that's a really good sign of a side that has championship ambitions. But back to the Blues, we've got a situation where Leon McDonald is almost certainly finished with them after this year. He's almost certainly going to be Scott Robertson's assistant at the All Blacks. He didn't even bother trying to hide that when asked about it the other week, or he did a pretty poor job of it anyway, and fair enough too. Well, I'd be pretty happy if I'd just been given a job, that that's where you're going to be heading. You've got a couple of guys heading overseas next year, including Beauden Barrett, who you would have thought when the Blues got hold of him, they would have thought we're going to get some good years out of him, some silverware, and we're going to be able to build a team around him. And at the moment, he's not really playing very good football at the moment. He made a pretty glaring error on Saturday night, which is really uncharacteristic, because he's not known for doing. He's known for being on and off, like being below what you would consider to be really good play from Beauden Barrett, but he's not really known for doing dumb stuff like standing on the dead ball line. The goal kicking is something that has been poor goal kicking is something that has been a part of his game for a while. Now he just has off nights. So I think that, at least from a coaching perspective, why Stephen Pettifeta wasn't taking the shots at goal is kind of a mystery, considering how reliable he's been. He didn't have a great night either. But a lot of people are talking about Beauden's big blunder. It didn't actually cost him in the end, because 2 plays later, Caleb Clark scored anyway in the same spot. So I don't think it's as big a deal as people are making it out to be. For me, the biggest, dumbest play that happened was when the score was at 20-13 with about 20 minutes to go, and the Blues were really hammering on the Chiefs line, and they'd put a kick through, and Damien McKenzie had to carry it back over his own goal line. Finlay Christie came in with just kneed him in the back, which was a really stupid play, because it reversed the whole situation. And from then on, the Chiefs actually gave themselves a bit of breathing space. So that's what I put that in. And a guy like Finlay Christie is like, you should know better than that. And it's just the little things like that that are creeping into the Blues game that makes me, wonder, like, what's actually going on with that team.
Yeah, it's the discipline, isn't it? It's the silly mistakes. It's giving away those penalties, and it's cost them 3 games, as you say. You can't win this comp if you lose to those 3 teams, and that's where they're sitting at the moment. They seem to be a better team than what they're actually, the level that they're performing at. But maybe they're not. Maybe because the results don't lie and the table doesn't lie. And as you say, we've got to give credit to the Chiefs, because you have to win a number of different ways to win this competition, and they've proved it. They were magnificent in the second half against the Crusaders. They were just as magnificent on defence against that Blues side on Saturday night. The Crusaders did the job against the Reds. This is pretty much the same side that played the Endura way, wasn't it? But this time they actually stumped up the newbies.
Yeah, I think so. I think the shadow team, I guess you could call it, probably got a rocket from Scott Robertson and just got told, like, hey, you've got to play your part in this campaign as well. You can't just stand there and hold tackle bags and wear the gear and rely on the big names to get you through this. This is a rotational competition. It always has been, and so if you're a wider squad member, you're going to get game time. And they went in, did the job, got out. It wasn't a great game. It was pretty similar to what the Chiefs did last week against the Waratahs, where you're seeing New Zealand teams very much treat those little jaunts over to Australia as like, let's just get in, get what we need, get out of here. And I don't think there's too many complaints about that. They're gearing up for a couple of big games coming up in the future. So it's
taking care of business. I actually call it, Jamie, I call it the Elvis win. It's TCB, taking care of business. That's all it is, isn't it?
Exactly. You're exactly right. And I think that the progression of the Crusaders is going to be interesting when you look at what's happening at the Blues and whether those two sort of are passing each other on different trajectories right now.
Jamie, do we know what's happening with Will Jordan? Because, I'm picking my All Blacks backline. I'm picking the team after every round, and I've got Beauden Barrett not in their first 15 starting. I've got Will Jordan starting at fullback. But is he ever going to be playing this year? Do we know?
No, I can't answer that question. It's one of those situations where it was described as a pretty vague kind of head-related injury, and then when it gets described as that, you don't really get any more information, and you're not supposed to really ask. And I can understand why. If he has taken a real shot to the head, these things do take a long time to recover from. We saw a similar case with Dane Coles a few years back, where he was out for almost like 6 months, and having talked to him about it, it was just like, it just took that long to get it over with. If it was an Achilles, if he'd ruptured his Achilles or done his ACL or something, then we have a time frame.
Yeah, we do.
To look for these ones we don't. And I feel for him. I do, because this is a World Cup year. It's the year where Will Jordan could really have made a massive name for himself, as if he hasn't already, but been a really big part of an upcoming All Blacks. He may well be. He could be back within a couple of weeks. We don't know that. But I think that obviously erring on the side of caution with a complaint like this is the best course of action.
Jamie Wall is with us, most trustworthy independent sports journalist in this country. All right, I want to talk about the Hurricanes versus the Force. That game just made me so angry. There were a couple of things I liked about it. One, it was in Palmerston North. Hadn't been there since, I think, 2019. So good on the Canes for taking a game to Palmy. Good crowd turned out. But what a rubbish game. They have this saying in NFL, rubbish time, and that's garbage time tries or touchdowns at the end of a game. And the Hurricanes, look, after 30 minutes, looked as though they're going to run up a cricket score, and then they take players off and they shuffle the team around. And then the end, the last 20 or 30 minutes, mate. I mean, you and me would have run through and scored tries. It was embarrassing.
Oh, maybe you might have. I don't think I've got the pace to keep up with any of those guys, no matter how tired they are. But I agree to a point. I mean, there's two ways of going about these games, and there's the way that the Crusaders and Reds played on Friday, where it was just like, one team's going to win and one team's going to lose, and you can just play it out for a 25-12 game that no one's going to remember in a couple of weeks. Or you can do it this way, and I mean, yes, some of the tackling was optional, and the emptying the benches didn't help the flow of the game at all. At least it didn't help the Hurricanes. You got to remember, the Hurricanes did actually have to finish with 14 players because of Brett Cameron's injury late in the game. And I hope he's all right, because he's been a pretty solid part of the Hurricanes so far. So, I mean, if you're a young kid going to that game and you're taking your kids to that game, you can't be too upset at one that reaps 87 points. They should have kicked the ball out as soon as the hooter went. They pissed around for 5 minutes and gave the Force a try that meant that they lost a bonus point. Like, that's pretty dumb on the Hurricanes' part. But there was something not quite nicely symmetrical about the fact that that's the ground where Super Rugby started.
Yeah, I like that.
Years ago.
Yeah.
And they ran up an old school Super Rugby score with a decent crowd in attendance. So I'm not getting too wound up about it. I would be questioning. I think, if anything, they would have learned a lesson about, like, okay, well, next time the hooter goes, we're gonna
your game management is called.
Yeah.
Some of that. The Highlanders, I reckon, are probably going to be the happiest team out of the whole comp after starting with that horror draw of Blues Crusaders. and then the Chiefs, and conceding 140 points to level the ledger at 3-3. And again, you can go through and say, hey, they've only played this, they've only played that. Look, they've beaten the Ndrua, they've beaten the Force, and they beat MP, and they racked up a whole lot of points against them. You've simply got to win your games, and you look at the points table afterwards. They're 3-3, just like the Blues are, just like the Ndrua are, and they're sitting there in 6th spot at the moment. But Moana Pacifica, I'm really worried about, mate. They've played 6, they've lost 6. Their points difference is minus 141. Barely a spectator turned up to watch that game on the weekend. I really fear for this franchise at the moment. We all want them to be good. We want them to be doing what the Ndrua is doing. What's going wrong?
Well, I'll just quickly on the Highlanders. I think you're right to bring up their schedule, because if you were to show someone schedule before the season started and you look at who they had to play, you probably would have guessed this is where they would have been at before it happened, because you're probably not going to win those games against the heavyweight New Zealand teams, and you probably are going to win these ones. So I think Clark Dermody was one of the people that realised that early on, which is why you saw so many guys sitting out those first few games. It's kind of an unfortunate situation, but you have to hand it to the guy that he's managed it quite well, and now they're in a reasonable position.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're talking about Moana. I'm not really sure what to sort of make of this situation at the moment. They need supporters that they don't have. I'm starting to question sort of as to how they've marketed this team, and how much sort of presumption went into the fact that people would just show up to watch Pacific Island based team at Mount Smart. You can't just plonk a team in a situation and expect people to just buy into it from day one. The reason why there's that sea of red and why South Auckland goes crazy when Mate Mā Tonga play is not just because they're wearing red jerseys and they're representing a very proud nation. It's because they're good. It's because people show up like expecting that team to win.
Yeah.
And they do.
Yeah, right.
You can't just chuck out a bunch of Super Rugby offcuts like Moana Pacific has. No offense to the players, but that is literally what they are, and put them in a competition against teams that are just stacked full of All Blacks and expect them to do well. And the people who they're trying to sell this team to aren't stupid. They know that. They know that paying the sort of money that it takes to get into a Super Rugby game to watch a team that doesn't really have a hope of winning just isn't worth it. So, how they're going to address that, I don't really know.
What about playing up in the islands, mate? I mean, is that...
Yeah, they are playing a game up in Apia this weekend. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see what the sort of turnout they get up there is, because really that's kind of where they should be playing and be based. But because it is essentially a New Zealand rugby initiative that this team is, that's why they're based here in Auckland.